If you missed it, first go watch our part 1 video talking about Expedition Bible's video about King David's tomb. It gives a lot of insight into how the tomb was found in the first place and how it's constructed. This one is all about how do we know that this tomb is the correct tomb, because there's another location in Israel that claims to be King David's tomb that maybe might not be. So let's talk about the evidence. Let's look at exactly what Joel Kramer has found and seen in Israel, and let's talk this through. Here we go.
So this is Jerusalem's western hill. On top of it is the tomb of King David. This is Jerusalem's eastern hill, where in 1914 Raymond Weil discovered the tomb of King David. One King David in history, but in Jerusalem, 2 tombs for King David. How is it that Raymond Weil himself, who once was a famous archaeologist, and this discovery of this tomb, these tombs, which was his most famous discovery, how have these become forgotten?
Let me tell you from experience, nobody goes to these tombs. Nobody goes to the King David's tombs that we talked about last time. What we see is them going to this tomb, which is the more traditional location of King David's tomb. But we're going to see some evidence that kind of, shows us why this is the case here.
Now, the one on the western hill is where the Jews worship today. It's where the tourists visit today. And why does hardly anyone visit the area in the city of David where the Bible says the tombs of the house of David are? Why doesn't anybody visit them?
Yeah, really interesting for sure.
So in part 1, we looked at the discovery of Raymond Weil. In part 2 here, we want to consider what the New Testament has to say about King David's tomb. And then I really want you to stick around for the end of this video, because we're going to look at another really significant discovery that Raymond Weil made while he was doing his excavations in the city of David. In this area is a sign that the Park Service put up to give information. And so we'll use this information on the sign kind of to guide us. The sign says, medieval traditions assign the site of David's tomb to Mount Zion, meaning the Western Hill. So it was a medieval tradition that started the understanding that King David's tomb is actually up on.
Which is so crazy, right? Like, like if you think about it in those terms, it's like someone literally like hundreds of years, if not thousands of years later, can come and tell you that this was the place, a traditional place that they found later on. I don't know. It's just so crazy to me that they would think that the traditional site is the accurate site when there's so little evidence pointing to that. I don't know. I'm not gonna go crazy quite yet, but let's watch this video. Come on.
The Western Hill. So what is it talking about specifically? What is this medieval tradition? Well, in 1165, AD 1165, there was a Jewish traveler traveling to Jerusalem. His name was Benjamin, and he heard this story from a rabbi, this tradition that they're referring to, and he wrote it down. He wrote down what this story was. And so in his book, he writes this. He's talking about 2 workers that were doing work in this area up on the Western Hill, believed to be Mount Zion at that time. He says this, they entered the cave and reached a large chamber resting upon pillars of marble overlaid with silver and gold. In front was a table of gold and a scepter and a crown. This was the sepulchre of King David. On the left thereof, in like fashion, was the sepulchre of King Solomon. Then followed the sepulchres of all the kings of Judah that were buried there. So this story, of course, has a lot of the markers of being fanciful, being made up. However, it's not because of the story.
Like, okay, what he's saying, he's being nice when he's saying that. Like, this story has a lot of the markers of being fanciful. There is zero chance you're going to find an area like this that has a crown and a scepter, like, just randomly sitting there. I guarantee you someone would have stole that, just like they do all the other goods that they find in Israel, and they sell it. They sell it at different places because it's valuable stuff, gold and jewels and everything else, right? Like, these are earthly possessions. Like, they're not magical items that have to stay in a fixed spot, right? Like, I guarantee you, over the turning over of Israel so many times, someone would have stolen those things. They would have sold those things. Like, it's just a bad, it's like a bad evidentiary belief. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
itself that I don't believe in the tradition of the Western Hill tomb being King David's authentic tomb. The reason I don't believe that that is the tomb of King David is because of the Bible. It's not where the Bible says that the kings from the house of David were buried.
Right.
Okay, so what we have here between these two tombs is very simple. We have two traditions. One is biblical and the other one is medieval. If you find two ancient texts that contradict each other, then what you're looking for is which one is the older. And the one that is the older is the one that's considered the most reliable. And archaeology works the same way. If you have two tombs of David, then you look at which one is older, which one has been believed for a longer period of time to be David's tomb. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty clear that we should follow the biblical record, the ancient biblical record, rather than this medieval tradition, this medieval story. So the sign also says Weil's theory was accepted for many years. An example of this is Benjamin Mazar, one of the father figures of Israeli archaeology, and he wrote this famous book. He did his excavations around the real Mount Zion, right, the Temple Mount.
Yeah, so I saw this question earlier. Hardboiled says, what was actually on Mount Zion? Well, the temple was on Mount Zion. So we know exactly where that temple was, right? We know where Mount Zion was. And so they were like even more evidence to the contrary of this previous traditional belief, which is still current traditional belief. A lot of people still go there today. I even went there on my first trip to Israel. They told me that that was where King David's tomb was. That's where I went on my first trip. These are the kind of places that we're actually cutting out of our Israel trips because I don't find value in them at all. Not that some of these traditional locations aren't accurate. Some of them are. I'm sure they are. But some of these locations, you just can't put your faith in them. So I would rather fill our trip up with places that you know are the correct places, such as the temple, right? Such as the heart of Jerusalem, where a lot of these things happened, such as the Mount of Olives, such as the Sea of Galilee, right? Like these are locations that cannot be disputed. So this is what we really like to fill our Israel trips up with, rather than going to a lot of these traditional sites that are kind of like, maybe it happened here, maybe not. Like I would rather not waste my time in some of those sites, and I would rather go to the for sure places that we know. Real quick, if you're thinking to yourself right now, man, I really need to go to Israel. Well, you're right. And I genuinely think that you should. We have an annual Israel trip every single year that I try to make as affordable as I possibly can. 2024 is almost fully booked. We only have a few spots left if you want to sneak in there, but 2025 is wide open. So shoot me an email at this email right here, and we'll get you all the information when we're ready to plan that trip. Anyway, we'd love to see you over there, and I think that you really need to think about this. Let's continue on with the video.
And so in this famous book of his called The Mountain of the Lord, he shows the real Mount Zion, the Temple Mount on the southern side where he excavated. So that's the cover of his book. On the back of his book are these tombs from the house of David that Weil discovered. And this one, the monumental one, most probable tomb to be King David's. And so we have an example of how this interpretation was accepted for many years in scholarship. But then afterwards, in the 1960s, the city of David was excavated by Kathleen Kenyon. So
you're going to hear her name a lot if we look at more of Expedition Bible's videos. Kathleen Kenyon was an amazing archaeologist, but there are some things that she did which are kind of like sketchy a little bit, like not quite right.
So as so often is the case, we have the earlier interpretations in biblical archaeology being more biblical in their interpretation because the early scholars believed in the Bible and used it as a historical source to interpret their archaeology. But then as time went on, the field became more and more secular, and so oftentimes later archaeologists reinterpret and overturn the interpretations of the earlier archaeologists that are based on the Bible. That's exactly what happened in this situation. In the 1960s, Kenyon comes along. She has to give, if these aren't tombs, then she has to give her interpretation of what they are. And so she writes in her book, Digging Up Jerusalem, the following quote. She says, "The controversial point is the cuttings that Weil identified as the royal tombs of the house of David. The biblical evidence that David and his heirs were buried in Jerusalem has stimulated many searches and fanciful identifications, including that of the so-called tomb of David shown to tourists today. The particular cuttings revealed by Weil were certainly unusual, consisting of two rock-cut tunnels side by side. They are not like any observed cisterns, though the plaster that covers the rock shows that they were at some stage used as cisterns."
So we're going to talk about that in a second. Hardboiled says, so the traditional tomb of David is actually part of the temple. I wonder what part. No, so you're misunderstanding. So the traditional tomb of David, they thought was on Mount Zion, where the temple was supposed to be. However, It is not. It's on the western hill of Jerusalem. So that's what I'm saying. It's like a wrong on top of a wrong. So it's wrong in the sense that this is not where the Bible says the tomb of David is. It's also wrong in the sense that they thought it was on Mount Zion and they didn't even put it on Mount Zion, right? So like it's a wrong on top of a wrong there. Yeah, strange.
We have here bedrock in this area, right? So if you're going to make a cistern, which its purpose is to hold water, then you're going to make your opening of where you carve out the rock from the top. And you're going to make some kind of a vertical type shaft, its purpose to hold water. Like this, that's got some other purpose. If its purpose is a cistern to hold water, then the last thing you're going to do is put your opening, as it is with these chambers where that Weil found, down here at the bottom. How would that hold water? Why would you design a bucket to hold water and design a hole in the bottom of it?
Yeah, so Kathleen Canyon is saying that originally these tombs were made as cisterns because of the plaster-like finish on them is similar to other cisterns that we've seen in history, right? And she may be right about a portion of that. I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist, but it does seem weird that there would be an exit to the cistern right at the bottom of the cave that would let out all the water that you're collecting. Just very strange. But we can tell that the original construction of this cave, this tomb, was from the front, that something would have to go in from the front, not come down from the top.
All I have to do is take people in. When I have a group there, I take people into tomb 1, and we stand in tomb 1, I read this interpretation, and the group always laughs. And the reason why is because this interpretation is absurd.
They are not like any observed cisterns, though they were used as cisterns.
The other thing to notice is that that she says that in her day, the tourists are visiting the tomb that Weil discovered as David's tomb.
Shown to tourists today. This is where the tourists used to come. They used to come here, where the Bible says that David and his offspring are buried.
So the other thing that Raymond Weil found in his excavations in this area was he found pieces of a building.
Yeah, Joel, by the way, Joel, if you ever see these videos, I would love to do a trip with you at some point. I don't know how possible that is. Yeah, I would love, even to just have a conversation with you would be amazing. So if you ever see this, definitely hit me up. You got my email in the description down below. I'd love to talk to you for sure.
Fancy building. It had carved pieces that he found, parts of pillars he also found, and most importantly, he found the dedicatory inscription from this building, which identified it as a synagogue. You can see the original inscription in the Israel Museum today. There's a replica of it in the place where the discovery was made. This is called the Theodotus inscription. It says this: Theodotus, head of a synagogue, son of a head of a synagogue, and grandson of a head of a synagogue, built this synagogue for the reading of the Torah. This dates to the 1st century BC, so we know even generationally before the 1st century BC there is a synagogue in this area of the tombs of the house of David. What better place for a synagogue to be than next to the tomb of King David? And so think about that. That means that Jews are coming to the synagogue right next to King David's tomb, and they are hearing their scriptures read to them publicly. And so one of the scriptures that they would have been read is the Psalm of David, Psalm 16. And so they would have known that David wasn't talking about himself when he was talking about this one who would come that would not decay in the grave. He couldn't have been talking about himself because he's buried in that tomb right next to the synagogue. Yeah. That's where he decayed in the grave. That's where his bones are. And this, in AD 33, is what Peter is using as he's giving his sermon to this crowd of Jews that is gathered at Pentecost. And so he says this in Acts 2:25-31. David.
Yeah, and if we're thinking about this in this term, a lot of people believe that Pentecost happened at the temple, right? And that all the people were baptized at the bottom of the southern steps where all these mikvah are, okay? So if that's the case, if Peter is giving this sermon at Pentecost, then you can literally see the city of David. You could see the tombs of David from that location as well. So all of this is intertwined. It's all connected together. So cool.
David said about him, and now he's going to quote Psalm 16, "Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest in hope, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead. You will not let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the paths of life." So now Peter's going to use Psalm 16 Fellow Israelites, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day.
And I bet he's literally pointing to it because it's right there.
And here's the interpretation of what David meant. Seeing what was to come, he spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, that he was not abandoned to the realm of the dead, nor did his body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of it. So they knew that David decayed in his grave, but that he also prophesied about the coming Messiah, the son of David, who would come, who would die, who would be placed in the tomb, but would not decay in the tomb, but would know the path of life. And so Peter is saying, you know what happened to Jesus, that he was nailed to the cross, that he was buried in this tomb. You know David's tomb, where his bones are. This other tomb, you know about the rumors that it was there was a resurrection and that it's empty. This is the Messiah. This is the one that David was talking about, that wouldn't decay in the grave. We are witnesses. He has risen from the dead. And it says that the crowd, they were pierced to their hearts, cut to the heart, and 3,000 of them came to believe in Jesus as their Messiah, because God made the evidence so strong that this is the one that David spoke about. So if you ever travel to Jerusalem, make sure you go to the right tomb of King David and not the wrong one. I hope that this video was of some value.
So cool. Again, if you want to check out his channel, Expedition Bible on YouTube, you're going to want to watch every single one of his videos. They're amazing. Super cool. Such great stuff. Not only does it give me amazing ideas for what I want to teach and see in Israel, but it just excites me so much. Seeing this evidence face to face, it bolsters my faith and makes me want to like scream to the ceiling of like, look at this. Look at what God has done. Look at the plan that he's put into motion, and we're just so blind that we don't see it most of the time. So for me, like, I just want people to be able to see it. This is why we're so passionate about Israel. This is why I want as many people as possible to go. This is why I try to make the trips as cheap as I possibly can, because I want you to be able to afford to go. I want you to be able to get on this trip, to go with people and just experience God in a new way. That's why I'm so passionate about it, because I truly believe it'll change the way that you think about God. It'll change the way that you experience your faith. You just watched a segment from our weekly live stream that we do every Sunday night at 6:30. If you want to watch the full 3-hour live stream, you can go over to patreon.com/thesnipelife or hit that link in the description down below to sign up over there. We'd love to see you over there. There's a ton of extra content, and I'm sure you're going to love it. All right, we'll see you on the next one. Peace.